We had a last-minute switch-up for this weekend's upcoming UFC Vegas 108 main event that is taking place at the Apex, the first time that the UFC has held an event there since May 31st. Oh, and by the way, the main event that night never even happened because that is when Macy Barber pulled out as she was getting ready to walk to the octagon to face Erin Blanchfield. But anyway, side rant being that we should have way less events at the Apex, so a nice little 2-month break should be the common thing. But back to this weekend's card, we were originally slated to see Amir Albazi taking on Tatsuro Taira in the main event, a big-time matchup in the flyweight division that would have featured the number 4 ranked Albazi and the number 6 ranked Taira, but instead Amir Albazi was pulled from the card due to injury, and in steps UFC newcomer essentially, but road to the UFC winner, Hyunsung Park. So firstly, hopefully Amir Albazi can heal up and get back into the octagon before the end of 2025 because this was going to be a big-time fight between him and Taira, where both of them were looking to bounce back from their first losses inside the UFC cage. But for Tatsuro Taira, the mission remains the same, although it's a different opponent because he is still looking to bounce back and rebound from his first ever UFC loss, and not just that, but his first ever professional loss in general in his 17-fight career so far. And that loss came to former title challenger Brandon Raw Dog Royval in a main event last October where they had an absolute classic for the flyweight division's history, where Royval would win a very close split decision in an extremely high-level, back-and-forth fight that would have plenty of action on the feet and in the grappling. It was a beautiful fight. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. And before that loss to Royval, Tatsuro was 6-0 in the UFC, with 4 of his 6 wins coming by way of finish, including the most recent one prior to that fight with Royval, a finish victory over Alex Perez, where yes, there was a knee injury, but it was due to the move and grappling skills of Tatsuro when he had the body triangle as Alex Perez was standing, and he tried to pull him down, and that's what caused the injury. It was something unique that we had never really seen before in the UFC. So now at just 25 years old, Tatsuro is entering his 3rd straight UFC main event, all of them of course in the UFC Apex, but that cannot be denied, the momentum and the hype behind Tatsuro being the most elite talent in the UFC currently that hails from the country of Japan. As I previously mentioned, he has had a 17-fight professional career with just 1 loss and 16 victories, having finished 12 of them with 7 submissions and 5 knockouts. He really does feel like one of the guys in the flyweight division that is spearheading the movement forward for the future of this division. He is the new breed of mixed martial artists that is a Swiss Army knife that is truly a great talent no matter where the fight goes, and I think he's going to look to capitalize on that hype behind him and showcase his skill sets for a 3rd straight time on the ESPN main event platform. And from a name value and competition standpoint, Hyunsung Park is nowhere near the caliber of Amir Albazi. We cannot overlook the fact that Park is 10-0, a perfect record at 29 years old, entering those prime years, and he has finished 9 out of those 10 victories and hails from South Korea. So this is the first main event ever in UFC history between 2 male Asian athletes. History is being made on Saturday night. And not only has Park finished 9 out of his 10 victories, but that lone decision victory on his resume came way back in November of 2018 in his professional debut. So not only is he undefeated, but he is on a 9-fight finish win streak, with only one of those 9 entering the 3rd round. And that was in the fight where he technically made his UFC debut, but at the same time won the road to the UFC finals. And since then, he has won back-to-back true UFC flyweight bouts against Shannon Ross via 2nd round TKO and Carlos Hernandez a 1st round submission, and that came in May of this year. These two are a combined 26-1, with 21 of the 26 combined victories between the two coming by way of stoppage and just 6 total decisions. I think we're in store for an absolute barn burner in the flyweight division, and I hope that it puts both of them on the map. Obviously for Tatsuro, you could say that he's already done that for himself, and for Park, not only is he saving this card by stepping in on short notice for this main event slot, but he can pick up the biggest victory of his career against the first ranked opponent that he has faced, and it just so happens to be the number 6 ranked flyweight in the world. So with a victory, he not only launches himself into the top 15, but he catapults himself directly into the top 10 and into flyweight title contention. I know it's not the most stacked fight night of all time, but if you're going to tune in at all this Saturday, you gotta check out this main event. I think it's going to be a special one at the top top of the bill. And I want to hear from you down in the comments below your thoughts on the Amir Albazi injury having to be pulled from this card and Hyunsung Park stepping in on less than a week's notice, filling Albazi's shoes and getting the biggest opportunity of his career. Will he seize on that, or Tatsuro Taira prove that there are levels to this game and that is just a little bit too much too soon for Park? I want to hear from you and get your predictions down below. And as I just said, this isn't the most stacked fight night card of all time by any means. However, there is one other ranked matchup on the card, so I want to hit that next, and that is the women's bantamweight division that desperately needs movement, so I'm happy that this fight is happening, and it's the number 10 ranked veteran Karol Rosa taking on the number 12 ranked surging relative newcomer to the UFC, Nora Cornolle. Although Karol Rosa is just 30 years old, she has already been in the UFC for 6 years and had 11 fights, racking up a 7-4 record, and the losses are to some of the better names in this bantamweight division, especially over the last few years. Most recently, a loss to Eileen Perez, who is the other surging prospect in this division, alongside Nora Cornolle, who currently sits at number 7. She's lost to Irene Aldana, a former title challenger, Norma Dumont, a future title challenger should she beat Raquel Pennington at Noche UFC in September, and Sarah McMahon, a former Olympic silver medalist and UFC title challenger. And she has notable victories over Pani Kianzad, her most recent win that came in August of last year. She's also beaten Yana Santos, a former title challenger, Betch Kohea, a former title challenger, and Jocelyn Edwards, who is in the top 15 currently. And not to mention her fight with Irene Aldana at UFC 296 at the end of 2023 was one of the most violent and brutal fights of that entire year, a fight of the year contender, a bloody back and forth war where she would lose the decision. And for Nora Cornolle, I said that she's a prospect, and technically she is, having just 4 UFC fights, but she is 35, so time is not on her side, and that's why the UFC isn't wasting any time, allowing her to get into the rankings and climb them quicker than usual. In those 4 UFC fights, she holds a record of 3 victories and just 1 loss, and the loss was to Jacqueline Cavalcanti, another prospect in this bantamweight division that I am very high on. That was a split decision loss last September, but in her 3 victories in the UFC, they have all been by way of finish, including her most recent win over Haley Cowan in April, where she would secure the 2nd round rear naked choke submission. Scratch that, 2 of the 3 wins in the UFC were by finish. I forgot that her debut was against Jocelyn Edwards, and she did get a victory, however, it was a decision there. But her other finish was a TKO over Melissa Mullins in April of last year. All in all, she is 9-2 with 8 finishes to her name, so the lone decision was that fight in her debut to Jocelyn Edwards. Other than that, 6 knockouts and 2 submissions, and I look for her to capitalize on this opportunity against Karol Rosa to break into the top 10, and by the way, cash as a relatively big underdog. When I looked this morning, this is Tuesday, July 29th, she was plus 154, and I'm kind of all over that right now. And outside of that, there aren't any more ranked fighters, and there aren't a ton of big storylines to hit on. However, there are people right on the outside looking in of potential rankings and some very fun fights, so I'm just going to mention a few here. We've got a pair of Dana White Contender Series 2022 alum Chris Duncan and Mateusz Rebecki fighting in the co-main event, both of whom not only fought on the same season of the Contender Series, but both have garnered a record of 4-1 in the UFC thus far. For Mateusz, he has finished 2 of those 4 victories, and the lone loss comes to the veteran Diego Ferreira in May of last year, where he would be finished in the 3rd round with just 9 seconds to go in the fight. And Chris Duncan has also finished 2 of his 4 UFC wins, and they are his last 2 fights in a row, both by way of submission over Jordan Vucinic in the 2nd round back in March in London, and before that, Balaji Oki in September of last year. And his UFC loss came to Manuel Torres, and that was a 1st round submission loss. In 37 combined fights, these 2 have only gone the distance 7 times total, which means that they have been finished or finished 30 of the 37. This is going to be a violent co-main event in the lightweight division, with the winner moving to 5-1 and maybe 1 more win away from cracking into the top 15. There's another lightweight banger in the featured bout between Elves Brener and Esteban Ribovics. Brener started his UFC career 3-0 with 2 of those 3 wins coming by way of knockout, but since then he has lost back-to-back fights to Miktabek Oralbai in May of last year and then to Joel Alvarez in August of last year by way of TKO. And for Esteban, he started his UFC career 0-1 10-1, then would tally off 3 consecutive victories, including a brutal knockout via head kick to Terrence McKinney. But he is coming into this one off of a loss in his last outing that happened in March, where he would face and lose a close split decision to Nasrat Haqparast. So both of these gentlemen looking to bounce back and get into the win column Saturday night. The Haitian sensation, the longtime UFC veteran, and the all-time leader in welterweight wins, Neil Magny, is fighting on this card at 37 years young, looking to get back in the win column for the first time since January of 2024, where he had that crazy upset over Mike Malott. Since then, he has dropped 2 fights in a row to Michael Morales and Carlos Prates, both by way of first-round knockout. However, look at those names. Prates top 15 and one of the biggest prospects in the division, and Michael Morales undefeated and just launched into the top 10 after beating Gilbert Burns earlier this year. And if you want to go a little bit before that, the other losses for Neil Magny over the last few years: Ian Machado Gary, Gilbert Burns, and Shavkat Rakhmonov. This man says no to no fights. And he's taking on this time not a younger up-and-comer, but another longtime UFC veteran in Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, who at 38 years old is also coming into this one off of a loss, and that was to Chidi and Jokawani in March of this year, where he would be knocked out in the second round of their fight. These are just 2 OGs that are looking to outlast one another in this welterweight division, if I'm being quite frank with you, and I think we may just see a fun scrap because of it. Kevin Vallejos would lose his September 2023 Dana White Contender Series bout to Jean Silva, but since then has not looked back, having tallied off 4 consecutive wins, all by way of stoppage, and that includes his UFC debut that would come in March after his second outing on the Contender Series in September of 2024. At 23 years of age, he already has a record of 15-1, with 13 of those 15 victories by way of stoppage, and hails from Argentina, so we may just have to look into making an Argentinian parlay this weekend, because he's also paired with Esteban Ribovics on this card. And he is taking on the 10-1 Danny Silva, who is 2-0 in the UFC and got a victory on the 2023 Dana White Contender Series. However, he's been getting things done in a little bit less of fashion in terms of style points, because all 3 of his fights, if you count the Contender Series one under the UFC banner, have been by way of decision. So now it's about time for him to make a big-time statement and look for his first finish win, but it will not be easy against Vallejos. So that is it for UFC Vegas 108, and I want to hear from you down in the comments below. Give me all of your predictions for this card, including your thoughts on that main event switch up last minute. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because we are currently on the road to reaching 1,000 subscribers before the end of 2025, and any and all support is greatly appreciated. On top of weekly breakdowns heading into each card, I also recap the most meaningful results in the aftermath, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the discussion and the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA. And you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you all in the next video.